Hi guys, welcome back for chapter 9, or A Startling Announcement. For all the time I had spent on the bay, I had precious little to pack. In short order, all that was left to do was bid my goodbyes. I had no idea when Mr. Swan or Mr. Russell would be back, and I wondered if they would even notice I was gone, now that they had Mrs. Frink to cook them chicken suppers and bake crumble pie. The evening before my departure, I lay awake a long time, watching the flickering fire with the quiet punctuated by the sounds of Brandywine's restless sleep. He twitched and squirmed, emitting little gruff barks from his throat every now and then, lost in some doggy dream. From a distance came the occasional shouts of voices rising and falling as men finished card games. I tried to comfort myself with the idea that in a few months' time I would be sleeping in a soft bed instead of a hard flea-infested bunk, and bathing in a proper tub instead of in a cold stream. There would be clean dresses and linen sheets and sweet soap. And Sally Biddle. I winced just imagining how she would view my disgraceful situation. Just as I predicted, she would say smugly. I knew Dr. Balt would come to his senses the moment you stepped off the boat. After all, who would want to marry a girl like you? But at least in Philadelphia, there were people who could help me. I would visit Papa's solicitor, and he would arrange things, and Mrs. Parker would give me good advice. Why, I could even go back to my old school, the Young Ladies' Academy, and assist my teacher, Miss Hepplewhite. After all, I had always received high marks. She would also be invaluable introducing me into society. The situation was not so dire, I told myself. Brandywine pressed his nose against my foot, burrowing closer for warmth. It would be winter soon, but I would not see it. I would never see another season on Shoalwater Bay, never watch the sun melt into the water like sugar dissolving into tea, never again feel the air grow soft, everything so still that you could practically hear your heartbeat. I shook myself and rolled over, dislodging Brandywine. The beast whined and settled himself against me more firmly. I should be happy to go home, I told myself. I would never have to wash another filthy shirt, cook another unappreciated meal, or milk another ill-tempered cow. I would never have to be disappointed by men who drank too much and gambled away a future. I would be a world away from them all. The sound of a fiddle hummed insistently in my head. I was spinning beneath a starry sky, the music rising around me like a whirlwind, the flames of a bonfire licking high into the night. All around me, pioneer men swung women about in time to the music. She's having a dream. Warm hands clasped my waist, and I looked, and there was Jehu smiling down at me. Relief surged through me at the familiar sight of his scar, shining bright as a talisman. I felt relief and something else, something that made my stomach twist in giddy anticipation and made me lightheaded. I'm so happy you're staying, Jane, he shouted, his voice mingling with the music like a note all its own. I'm not, I wanted to say, but my throat was so tight that I couldn't make the words out. And then it didn't seem to matter what I said, because he was leaning down, his lips hovering over mine, and more than anything I wanted one last kiss. The fiddle grew louder and louder, filling my ears, screeching high until suddenly the world tilted crazy, and I blinked and found myself back on Walnut Street. For a moment, all I could do was drink it in. The shouting newsboys, the maids gossiping on their way to their errands, the dogs begging at the butcher shop, the carriages clip-clopping down the cobblestone streets. There was the aroma of baking bread and fish and manure, and a dozen other smells that mixed and swirled in a way that was only Philadelphia. I walked quickly down the street to our house, my heart beating rapidly. Walking toward me, carrying a basket, was a figure I would recognize anywhere. I ran straight into her arms. Mrs. Parker, I cried, hugging my old housekeeper tight. I've missed you so. Oh, miss, Mrs. Parker said, her plump face clouding over. You must make me one of your cherry pies now that I am back, I insisted, tugging her along with me as we walked toward home. But Miss Jane, she protested. And then we were standing in front of our house. But our house was gone. Where our parlor had once been situated, a groom led a horse from a stable. Miss Jane, I tried to tell you, Miss Parker said sadly, her face flushed with unhappiness. Behind me, I heard a soft laugh, a laugh I knew all too well. Sally Biddle. I turned around. She was shaking her head at me, blonde corkscrew curls bobbing. Why, if it isn't Jane Peck, Sally Biddle drawled. My face drained of blood. Sally pointed her fan at me. Your house always did bear a great resemblance to a stable. Somehow I found my voice. You. It was a very good bargain, really, Sally informed me in a silky voice. When your father died, my papa bought it for a song. I was the one who suggested it, actually. This wasn't happening. Oh, and Jane, I forgot to mention, I'm having a party on Friday. Perhaps you can come, she paused and laughed softly, and work in our kitchen. And then she burst into laughter. Her laughter stung my ears like breaking glass, and I couldn't bear it. I just picked up my skirts and ran into the street. I ran down the cobblestones, my face wet with tears. Mrs. Parker's voice rang in my ears. Watch out, miss! The carriage was coming straight at me, swerving wildly. I screamed once and then woke up. Ooh, what a nightmare. The schooner was due to depart in the afternoon, so I set off first thing in the morning to say farewells. I headed first to Father Joseph Chapel. It was cool, but the sky was bright and blue. As I followed the path that led to the chapel, I rehearsed what I was going to say to Father Joseph. The gentle priest had fuzzy eyebrows that danced beneath the dome of his bald head when he was excited. That's exactly what they were doing when I arrived at his chapel. He was describing various saints to Cape, who seemed to be on the verge of nodding off. Cape, the young man who had proposed that I bake pies in exchange for work on the oyster beds, was thus far Father Joseph's only recruit. Father Joseph was very enthusiastic about converting him to Catholicism. He had baptized him Francois, but everyone still called him Cape. Hello, Father, I said. Mademoiselle Jane, Father Joseph said happily. I was just discussing the saints with young Francois here. Cape looked relieved at the interruption. Boston Jane, Cape said, patting the shirt he was wearing. It was the one I had sewn for him. This shirt is very good. Would you care to join us? Father Joseph asked eagerly. I hesitated for a moment. Father Joseph had been one of my companions on the voyage from Philadelphia, and while the priest had vexed me at first, I had grown fond of him. I'm leaving, I said. Father Joseph raised one fuzzy eyebrow. Leaving? Yes, I've decided to return to Philadelphia on today's schooner, I said quickly. Mais pourquoi, mademoiselle? Pourquoi would be why. He asked, opening his hands wide, palms up. This is your home. The way he said home with such contentment and certainty made my unease grow until it felt like it was like a heavy ball of unbaked dough in the pit of my stomach. Philadelphia is my home, I said quickly. Truly, I don't belong here. And besides, the oystering venture with Mr. Swan has been a disaster. But mademoiselle, you must give Mr. Swan a second chance. It is Christian to forgive. I barreled on as if he hadn't even spoken. I don't fancy spending the rest of my days taking in men's mending. Who will make pie? Cape asked. I'm sure Mrs. Frink is quite capable of baking a pie. Cape seemed unconvinced. Have you told Jehu about your plans? Father Joseph asked quietly. I don't believe Jehu's opinion has any bearing on my life, I said stiffly. You must at least tell Caruxo that you're leaving. Remember that was Handsome Jim. I suppose I should, I admitted reluctantly. I had hoped to make a quick escape. He's at McCarty's helping mend the roof with Jehu, I thought. Father Joseph looked relieved. Wait a moment. He dug around in a basket in the corner and pulled out 2 bottles of wine. Would you mind taking this to McCarty for the pain? Where did you get them? He looked a little shamefaced. It's communion wine. But poor Father Joseph was normally firm about church doctrine, and I imagined that the bishop would not approve of doling out communion wine. Hi, babies. Communion wine to men who broke their legs. I took the bottles. You shall be missed, mademoiselle, Father Joseph said, and then he gave me a great big hug. I hugged him back hard, the scratchy wool of his robe grating on my cheeks and soaking on my tears before he could notice them. The day grew unseasonably warm and humid. By the time I reached McCarty's homestead, I was damp and uncomfortable. I took off my cape and carried it. Jehu was perched on the roof, shirtless, his muscled back coated with a fine sheen of sweat. Boston Jane, Caruxo called, walking toward me, carrying planks. He wasn't wearing a shirt either. Was I destined to see the bare chest of every man on Shoalwater Bay? Jehu heard Caruxo's shout and peered at me. He scaled down to the ground. Something wrong back at the cabin, he asked, wiping the hair from his forehead. No, I stammered. Everything's fine. What have you got there? I held the bottles of wine aloft. I brought them from McCarty, from Father Joseph. That's the only reason you came? He asked quietly. Before I could answer, Caruxo was at my side. He nodded at the roof, explaining, we fix roof in Chinook Way. The Chinook way was to use cedar planks, as I knew from helping Caruso myself once. It looks very good, I assured him, as he and Jehu both retrieved their shirts to put them on. Come meet Kokum, Caruso said, taking me by the elbow and leading me into the log cabin. The last time I had seen McCarty, he had looked strong and fit, even a little full at the belly. Now he was thin and drawn. His leg was propped up on a pile of pillows and secured by 2 thick sticks bound with a bandage. A Chinook woman with a dark fall of hair was bending over him, her face turned away. Is that Miss Peck I see? McCarty joked, his smile strained. The woman gave a firm tug on the bandage around his leg. Kokom, he barked in pain, struggling to sit up. But his wife pushed him back to the pillows. McCarty reached for a whiskey bottle on the side table, but Kokom beat him to it, swatting his hand away. Kokom must be his wife, I guess? McCarty groaned dramatically. Kokom shook her head as if scolding a belligerent schoolboy and turned to us with a sigh. Boston Jane, Caruso introduced. I'm very pleased to finally meet you, I said, extending my hand. Kokom shook it firmly. I have heard much about you. Like many of the Chinooks, she spoke very good English. I pressed the wine into her hand, from Father Joseph. Good man, McCarty called from the bed. I'm nearly plumb out of whiskey. Kokom sniffed in disapproval and then turned to me. Come and have some tea, she offered. Thank you very much. That would be lovely. Kokom set out tea and freshly made biscuits. I eyed McCarty's miserable form on the bed. How did McCarty break his leg? McCarty groaned dramatically. Kokom rolled her eyes. My husband wanted to fix roof himself. I could do it too, he complained from the bed. She and I exchanged a meaningful glance and laughed. I wanted you to meet my daughter, Kokom said, but I sent her to stay at my father's lodge because my husband is so much work, she finished, with a rueful glance at McCarty. What brings you out here, Miss Peck? McCarty asked. Looking to hire another schooner? Because I don't recommend waiting much longer if you've got oysters to send to San Francisco. I've got a feeling that winter's gonna come early this year. Now, it's just a feeling, mind you, but I'm usually right about these sort of things. Jehu's figure suddenly filled the doorway, and I remembered why I had come. Actually, I said, marshalling my voice, I won't be requiring a schooner. I swallowed hard. I came to say goodbye. Goodbye? Caruso repeated. Yes, I said quickly, before my courage disappeared. There's a schooner leaving this afternoon bound for San Francisco. I'm going home. But how can you pay the fare? Jehu asked bluntly. Meaning, like, how can she pay, the cost? He was so irritating. My financial affairs are none of your concern. She's so mean to him. Everyone knows Swan gambled away your money. This is how I'm paying for my fare, I said, in frustration, thrusting out the watch. Jehu snatched it out of my hand, inspecting it closely. Who gave this to you? A gentleman gave it to me. He took a step forward, his eyes turning dark, like the sky over the bay before a storm. There aren't any gentlemen out here. You are most certainly correct on that account, Mr. Scudder. I stared, glaring right back at him. But I assure you, Mr. Abraham Black was a gentleman in all respects. Abraham Black? McCarty croaked hoarsely from his bed. Oh, then you are acquainted with Mr. Black? I asked eagerly. Isn't he perfectly charming? It was so refreshing. Where is he now? McCarty demanded, pulling himself up and hobbling over using a thick cane. Pain etched on his face from the effort. Why, I have no idea. He left yesterday. Did he say where he was from? He asked anxiously. California, I believe. What did he look like? Well, he was about your height, with trim gray hair. He wore a neat black suit. Jane, McCarty asked urgently, did you tell him where Russell went? I didn't understand why McCarty was so upset. I told him that Mr. Russell and Mr. Swan had gone to the rendezvous with Governor Stevens. Oh, Lordy. What? McCarty slumped against the wall, his face white. He's going to kill Russell, he whispered. Dun, dun, dun. I knew that guy was bad news. It was too fishy. Until we read again, the next chapter is McCarty's strange story. So it sounds like we're going to learn about Mr. Black.